Hi, I'm Kim. I'm the yoga program coordinator and supervisor at Mesa Rim in Reno. And today I want to lead you through a few myofascial release exercises and some deep passive stretches for the muscles of your low back, outer hips, and your deep hip flexors, your psoas. So these are all areas that can create discomfort around your SI joints, discomfort in your lumbar spine. It's a pretty common experience for many people. And these are some ways that you can address those bits of discomfort. So today we're going to need a few items. You'll want 2 yoga therapy balls tied together. Maybe instead of something fancy like this where I've got my 2 therapy balls in a drawstring bag, you might just have a couple of tennis balls or a couple of lacrosse balls and a long sock that you can stick them in to tie them together. So you'll want something like that. You might want a strap or a tea towel or a bathrobe belt, something you can use to extend your reach. This is not essential, but it can be handy. And you will want something that you can elevate your hips on. So I'm going to use, for part of the time, my meditation cushion. You may also choose to use a pillow, a rolled blanket, or even a yoga block. So these are some of the items that we'll be using today. We'll begin with some myofascial release for the muscles on either side of your lumbar spine. And for this, you'll want the 2 therapy balls or 2 tennis balls or 2 lacrosse balls tied together. And we'll simply lay down with the balls on either side of your spine. So this gap in the middle will be where the bones of your spine are, and the muscle will be on either side where the pressure of the ball will be. And we'll begin just at the very top of your sacrum. So your sacrum is the back of your pelvis, base of your spine. Just above your sacrum is where we'll begin with the ball. So just where you feel those muscles attach, right about there. And you can place the balls there and you'll lay down on them. Knees bent, feet about hip width apart or a little bit wider. And you can rest back here. And now you have an opportunity to explore a little bit. So maybe it feels good just to stay here static for a few moments. You could press into your feet and lift your hips to get a little bit more pressure. You can also explore pelvic position. So it's interesting, if I tip my pelvis into what's called an anterior tip, that is the top of my pelvis rocking forward and my sitting bones rocking back, it accentuates the curve in my lumbar spine, and this is a different sensation. And I can take it the other way. I can hug my belly in, press into my feet, use my glutes a little bit, and press my low back towards the therapy ball. So we can explore this kind of action, pelvic rocking. You can also try rocking your knees a little side to side. And as you rock your knees side to side, you'll feel your weight shift from one side to the other. You might even feel a sensation of the therapy balls rolling across the muscles of your spine. So you get a cross fiber release. So you can spend maybe 30 to 60 to 90 seconds in this spot. And after you've spent that long, you'll press into your feet just enough to lift your back and roll the therapy balls up a little bit higher. And then we can again explore, maybe working with this pelvic movement, maybe rocking knees side to side. And then again, every 30 to 60 to 90 seconds, you'll reposition and you can move the therapy balls up through the entire length of your lumbar spine and give yourself a really nice release this way. That's our first exercise. And that releases your erector spinae muscles, the ones that run on either side of your spine, and they bring you into spinal extension when they're working. All right, so our second release will be for the musculature of your gluteals and your outer hip. So with this first variation of the outer hip release, we can hit gluteus maximus, which is the large muscle of your glutes, gluteus medius, which is the one up a little bit higher, and we can even get a little bit into tensor fasciae lata, which is the muscle right at the top of your iliotibial band. So I'm going to turn around for a moment so you can see the placement. We want to place the paired therapy balls just to the side of your sacrum. So my sacrum is right here, back of my pelvis. Here's gluteus maximus, here's gluteus medius. I want to place the balls at an angle following the angle of the edge of my sacrum. So here's the edge of my sacrum. I'm going to place the balls into my gluteals right about here at this sort of an angle. We again will lay down in that almost bridge pose position, laying on your back, and then placing the therapy balls at that little bit of an angle, following the angle of your sacrum, but we're in the musculature of the gluteals, not on the bone of the sacrum. So I can just start here, and this might be enough. Pressing into my feet, maybe I start to rock a little weight over to the side where I have the balls. This might be enough. You could try extending this leg. So as this leg extends out, the intensity gets a little greater. And then every few moments, 30 to 60 to 90 seconds, you'll roll slightly more to your side. So I happen to be working on my right side. So every so often, I'll roll just a little more to my right. And so now I can feel the sensation of the therapy balls rolling through my gluteals, making their way now almost to the TFL, tensor fasciae lata. I can really feel that one. That tends to be tight in a lot of us, especially if you run or hike or cycle. So if you really want to up the intensity, the last stage of this exercise is to step the opposite foot across. So you're really rolling weight towards the TFL and then hanging out here. And this can be a really nice release if you do have discomfort in your iliotibial band from tightness in your hip from something like a repetitive movement of running or cycling. This is a really nice and gentle way to release that. All right, getting a little bit deeper into our hips. We'll use a single ball for this next one. So this next one is really nice for gluteus maximus, the big muscle of your hip, of your glutes, and for your piriformis. So piriformis is the deep muscle. It's a hip rotator. It's underneath your glutes. And again, it tends to be pretty tight and pretty sore in a lot of people. If you have, say, sciatic pain, this might be one place that you have some tightness. So this is something that might be helpful for you. So again, I'll turn around so you can see the placement for the ball. We want the ball to go right in the center of your gluteus maximus. So right in what you might call the bullseye of your glutes, right in the middle, right about there is where the ball is going to go. So we again lay down in our bridge pose with the ball right in the bullseye of gluteus maximus, and we'll start to lift, in this case my left hip. I'm pressing into my feet a little bit, lifting my left hip, and I'm starting to roll some weight over to the right side. This might already be enough. I can feel this all the way down into my glutes and into my piriformis just with this little bit of weight. If you want to go a little bit deeper, we take the right leg into external rotation and bring it into a figure four. So now I'm really targeting those deep hip rotators. And I can hang out here for, again, 30 to 60 to 90 seconds, finding those spots that feel like they're doing something. There's a sense of release when you find the spots that you should work. And you might need to shift around a little bit until you find the juicy spots, but when you find them, hang out. And you can also start to turn, pressing into your left foot, dropping your right hip, dropping your right knee, and you can roll a little bit more to the right and maybe find some other interesting places to work. So this is a really good release, particularly if you have a little bit of discomfort, sciatica, or tightness in your glutes, pain in your hip that might be relieved by this particular exercise. This one's pretty deep, so you probably don't want to do this more than a few times a week. All right, so those are our myofascial releases. I want to also show you a couple of stretches that you can do for your psoas. So psoas is really deep hip flexor. It runs from just below your diaphragm in your low back through your pelvis, and it attaches to your upper thigh bone. And so when we bring our leg into extension, we get a stretch in the psoas. When we bring our hip into flexion, the psoas is shortening. For most of us, our psoas tends to be relatively short because we spend a lot of time sitting. And often things like lunges are what we use to stretch that out. The trouble with using lunges is you're actually using your psoas muscle to help you balance while you're holding the lunge. So these next two exercises I'll show you will give you a way to stretch your hip flexors and stretch your psoas without having to hold your body weight. So you might be able to get a little bit more length and a little bit more relaxation in these two exercises. So the first one I'll show you requires a lift under your hips. I'm going to use my yoga block. You could use a rolled blanket, you could use a pillow, you could use a stack of books. We want to take this block under our sacrum toward the tailbone side. So I talked a little bit before about anterior and posterior tipping. We want to find a little bit of posterior tipping in the pelvis. So we end up with the top of the pelvis dropping towards the back of our body, and we're lengthening our low back a little bit. And you'll notice that that kind of opened up my hip flexors a little bit. So even just being here, right here, feet flat on the floor, hips elevated with the support slightly to the tailbone side, this is already a stretch and release in your hip flexors. If you want to go a little bit farther, you'll take one leg towards straight. So again, I'll show my right side. Straighten out one leg. Keep your heel on the floor. Keep your toes pointing to the ceiling. So now you'll see I'm essentially in a lunge. I'm dropping the head of my right femur down. I'm pointing my toes to the ceiling. I'm holding here, and I'm starting to get a pretty interesting stretch in the front of my right hip. And so I could hang out here for a few breaths. If you would like to go deeper, we pick up the left foot. Now, as you pick up your left foot, watch your hips. There'll be a tendency for them to want to twist, hiking your left hip up towards your shoulder, bypassing the stretch a little bit. So we'll see if we can keep hips square, draw left knee in, and maybe you just interlace fingers around the back of your thigh. Here's where you might want your extended reach. You could loop the strap around the ball of your foot, and now if you look at this, I look exactly like I'm in a lunge. I'm just upside down. So I'm doing that same pose that you would do standing, but I don't have to use my musculature to hold my body weight. So I could stay here for several minutes and continue to get some release in this hip. As I hold this pose, I'm thinking about softening my ribs in. I'm thinking about dropping my lower back ribs towards the floor, and that will all help to release your psoas too. So you might hold this one for a couple of minutes, and then you would switch sides. The last posture that I'd like to show you is, again, a really nice stretch for your psoas. It will also stretch quadratus lumborum, which is the one that attaches your hips and ribs towards each other. It's the one that hikes your hip up towards your shoulder. And it's really nice for stretching the muscles between your ribs too. So for this variation, I'm going to use my meditation cushion. It's nice to use something a little bit soft and something that kind of matches the shape of your waist. So I'm going to put this in the curve of my waist and lay down, arms extended, and palms together. And I'll rest my head down to the bottom shoulder. In this case, I've got my right arm down. So I start here, and as you can see, I'm getting a nice opening for the whole left side of my body here. So when I'm ready to bring this into psoas, I can extend my left leg. I'm going to keep the ball of my foot on the floor, maybe work a little internal rotation so my heel is slightly higher than my toe. And this is already starting to feel like a stretch in my hip flexors. If I want a little bit more, I move the left foot back. And then I can track my left knee with my right toes for some support. Step the left foot back, track the right toes. This feels about right to me. So I would just hang out here, and just like the previous passive stretch, you could hold this for several minutes. And once more, as we're working into these deep muscles, you can start to work with your breath. Feeling the front ribs soften in, feeling a little space open up in your back, and holding here really for as long as you like. Once you've finished this practice, it can be really nice to give yourself a passive release for your hip flexors. And so for that one, you would want to elevate your hips. I'm going to use my block for this one. You could use your rolled blanket or your cushion. Coming back into this position where I place the block, this time right in the middle of my sacrum. So I'm looking for neutral spine, a little curve in my lumbar, a little flexion in my hips. I can let my arms release out to the side, walk my feet wide. My feet are now the width of my mat. And I'm going to let my knees lean in towards each other. With this little bit of internal rotation in your thighs, feet wide, hips elevated, this is a natural way to release any remaining tension in your hip flexors and in your psoas. And again, you could hold this one for as long as you like. This is a really lovely relaxation pose. So those are just some simple ways that you can use to help release some tension, maybe discomfort in your hips and your lower back.